Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 218 of the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris. And we have some exciting breaking news to share. The MacArthur Genius grants were just announced, and we are really happy to see Ruha Benjamin among the awardees. Her book, Viral Justice, How We Grow the World We Want, was one of my favorites last year. And I know I have her book on imagination waiting to be read. So congratulations to her and all the other winners. I know that Jason Reynolds is another writer that was also awarded a grant, which is very cool. We'll put a link in the show notes so you could see the winners, but easy enough to Google them. What a great gift for them, because it's $800,000 and no strings attached.
Yeah, they're helping society, a lot of them already, but wow, what a way to give them a shot in the arm to be able to help further their dreams and their work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these grants are all about supporting people who think differently, to show the range of creative thought and imagination, like Benjamin's work. And the awardees, I believe this year, they were anywhere in their 30s up until mid 70s. So it's a wide range of ages and genders and different types of work, you know, biologists, writers, poets.
Yeah, very cool. So Chris, what are you currently reading?
Well, I am still reading Jane Austen's Bookshelf, a rare book collector's quest to find the women writers who shaped a legend. This is by Rebecca Romney, and I mentioned before that it's not coming out till February 2025, but I just want to give it another shout out. It is so good. I've been reading a digital advanced reader copy, and in the mail today at Book Cougars headquarters, we just got the physical ARC, and I'm enjoying this so much. It is Romney looking at Jane Austen through the woman writers who influenced her, and looking at those women writers and why they've been forgotten or pushed out of literary history and never considered for the canon, along with her own memoir of collecting these women writers, as well as Jane Austen. So it's really fascinating. I'm on to chapter 3 at this point. So the first chapter was pretty much focused on Jane Austen. The second chapter on Frances Burney. Her dates are 1752 to 1840. And so I was thinking about rereading all of Jane Austen's novels next year, but now I am wondering if maybe this book could be a great guide to read, maybe one by each of these women writers that she mentions, or maybe just take one of these women writers a year and have a reading plan for the years ahead. It's really a wonderful read. I highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in women writers, literary history, book collecting. And Romney, what's fun is we had her on in the past talking about the book and the collection she put together on romance novels. And she talks in here a little bit about her resistance to reading initially Frances Burney because her books were considered, you know, romances. And she had been initially resistant to that. And she talks about her own prejudices against romance. So it's pretty neat. I can't say enough good things about it. Jane Austen's Bookshelf by Rebecca Romney.
Well, I'm reading a novel that I started very excitedly and then put down because I got distracted by other novels and books, as happens. And it's The Mighty Red by Louise Erdrich. This book just published this week. So I started it as an ARC and then, as I said, lost sight of it. This is about a woman named Crystal Freschetti. And the opening chapter, she is delivering sugar beets from a farm to a sugar factory. And she drives her truck at night. And she's talking about her life in North Dakota and thinking about her daughter Kismet and her husband Martin, who are at home. The chapters are very short. I'm not very far in. Again, I think I had gotten up to page 50, but decided I needed to go back so I could remember what was happening. And I just wanted to read this one part. Louise Erdrich is just such a great writer, and she's funny, and her dialogue is really good. These chapters have really funny titles. So her daughter, Kismet, is sort of in a relationship with two different boyfriends in her high school. And one of them, because an event happened that is still slightly unclear, feels like he has to marry Kismet. So he's proposing to her. And then after this proposal has taken place in a car, she goes home, and the title of this chapter is The Scream. And Kismet runs into the house very excitedly yelling, "Mom." And so, like a lot of moms, she's like, "What happened?" And Kismet says, "Gary asked me to marry him." Crystal stepped away from her daughter and her hands flew up to her face. "Mom, you look like the Scream," which I could just picture. And then the chapter goes on where Crystal's trying not to do that thing where you overreact. She's like, "I'm just going to listen." And she's pinching her knee, the side of her knee. So she just listens without judgment. And it's just a very sweet scene. And I love how the chapter title sets up the scenes in a certain way. That's just a little aside about her writing. What she is already talking about is the landscape of North Dakota. And this young man, Gary, that's proposed to Kismet, works on the farm. It is his family's beet farm that Crystal works for. And there's already been mention about the pesticides that they use on the farm. So I know already that I'm in good hands with Louise Erdrich, where she's going to tell a tale about the people living in North Dakota, but also what's happening in the environment in which they live. So excited to have a new Louise Erdrich novel in my hands. Again, it's called The Mighty Red. Oh, and for any of you who are book page readers from the library, I'm holding this up for Chris to see. She is on the cover of Book Page this month. And there's a little interview with her about the novel.
Nice. Yeah, I picked that up at the library when I saw it. It's been crunched in my purse. I haven't read it yet, but I'm carrying it around with me because I know I will have an opportunity soon.
Yes, I usually end up having to unfold them
Yes.
because they end up in the bottom of my computer bag or something, but I do love to read them.
Yeah. Well, the new novel that I started is an old one from 1866. It's Wilkie Collins' novel called Armadale, which I had never heard of until a few months ago when people started talking about their Victober reading hopefuls. It's early October, and Victober is a month-long celebration of reading all things Victorian. This is the novel that I chose, one, because I'd never heard about it before, and I wanted to choose a Wilkie Collins novel because the hosts on BookTube who are hosting Victober, they have different categories of types of novels or types of Victorian literature to read. But then there's also a category to read books by Wilkie Collins to honor booktuber Jennifer Brooks, who passed away earlier this year. And then another booktuber who had passed away, well, her favorite was Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle. So reading something by him as well. So Armadale, I just started it. I'm already sucked into it. It is about two men who end up at a health spa, basically, in the Black Forest in Germany. One is a tall, slim, severe Scottish man. And then the other guy is an Englishman who is pretty much on his deathbed. And they arrive by different types of carriages, one in a private carriage, the other in a public carriage, which I will talk about a public carriage in A Tale of Two Cities when we get to Just Read. These two men are kind of put together in a surprising way. And I'll say no more, but I am really enjoying it so much. More to come on that. So, Emily, what have you just read?
Y'all, I've been doing some reading. It's really exciting. We were planning to do a staycation. So I got to the library and took out a stack of books. And then we ended up in the car and driving to Michigan, which was a bit of a surprise. It was totally spontaneous, but I did read along the way, and I had been reading a lot the week before. So one of the books I read was by Liz Moore, and I'll talk about that more to come. But I love her writing so much, I decided to see if she had any short stories. And I came across this project that was done in the New York Times during the pandemic. It was called the Decameron Project. And it was in the Sunday magazine that they put out. It was on July 7th, 2020. I'll put something in the show notes. I'm not sure if you'll be able to open the actual magazine that you can read online with the stories, but I'll try. If nothing else, you can go there and see what it looks like. But it was inspired by Giovanni Boccaccio's, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, the Decameron. Okay. which was a book of 100 tales processing the bubonic plague. And so here we were, it was July during the pandemic. They asked 29 authors to write short stories about their experience during the pandemic. So I read Liz Moore's, it's called Clinical Notes, and it's literally set up as if a medical professional is writing notes about what's happening in this situation. And it's a couple with a new infant baby who has spiked a high fever, and they're trying to decide if they need to take the baby to the hospital, which is something that people with a new baby have probably experienced. But then she layers on top of that, like, oh, but going to the hospital looks a lot different right now. Like, that was the time where we still didn't know anything. The hospitals were overwhelmed with people. And so it was just this really short story, but very tense. There's this 24, 48-hour period with this infant with a high fever. Do we or don't we go to the hospital? Whew, it brought me right back to that feeling of people telling you all sorts of stories about still needing medical care that wasn't COVID related during that time, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I enjoyed it so much, I decided to read another one as my other short story for the 2 weeks. And I wanted to read an author that I've heard a lot about but never read. So I chose one by Victor LaValle called Recognition. And this was a short story, but it was also kind of semi-autobiographical, or at least I made that assumption by reading it. It felt so real to me. It's about a man who moves into a new building in New York City in December of 2019. So we're 3 months, right, prior to March of 2020. And then the pandemic arrives and folks start leaving the building. As we know, there was a mass exodus from New York City. If people could leave, a lot of them went to second homes or moved to family. He remains in the building. And one day he's standing by the elevator and meets this woman in the building named Murda at the elevator. You know, they're just kind of chatting. She has these really cool shoes that look like a piano. They have like piano keys on them. So a conversation starter. And so they befriend each other and start walking to the grocery store together and that sort of thing, just for a little companionship, and then heading to their own separate places. But the super starts coming through the building and marking doors with a big silver V, you know, with a spray paint can of silver. And that means that people have vacated the building, or their apartment, I should say. So creepy, right? And the
spray
V's,
painting, that seems like really kind of
like permanent.
I know,
right?
yeah.
I mean, and according to this story, that's why I was like, is this, I know I'm reading a short story. Is it true or is it not true that, you know, it was required? Like, they wanted to know in certain boroughs, they required them to do this, like how many people in the building have left or not. And I think it's because the supers needed to go and knock on doors every day and see if people were alive or not.
Oh my gosh, right? Yeah.
Ugh. Oh, both of these stories were fantastic. So if you're looking for something to read and you're interested in going back to July of 2020, which some people probably are not, some people are, I would highly recommend this as a good spot to go. And again, I will put those in the show notes. What about you?
Well, I realized that in the last episode, I didn't wrap up my reading of The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh by Claudia Gray. I finished it, really enjoyed it. It's a cozy mystery set in Jane Austen's world. So for those who've read Jane Austen, you know some of these characters. Like in this one, it's Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet and some other characters, like the daughter of one of the guys from Northanger Abbey. I'm not that familiar with that novel. It's been a long time since I've read it. So maybe I'll reread that one because that is a fun kind of gothic-y type novel. But it had a pretty good conclusion, and I would totally recommend it to people who are interested in cozy mysteries, historically set, or Jane Austen fans. I had read the first one in this series, The Murder of Wickham, which I enjoyed, and I thought she does tend to pick characters to kill off or imperil who you think like you're not exactly in love with those characters. So
right. We've all been waiting for someone to do this.
If somebody has to die, right?
Right.
But the second one is the one that I missed, The Late Mrs. Willoughby. That came out in 2023. And so The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh just came out in 2024. So I just wanted to give you all that series in order. There's 3 of them. Lady Catherine, there have been attempts on her life. And so her great-grandnephew is Jonathan Fitzwilliam, Darcy and Elizabeth's son, who is partnering with Juliet Tilney, who is the daughter of the guy from Northanger Abbey. They're teenagers. He's neurodivergent, and she's a very compassionate young woman, very thoughtful. And they've teamed together quite accidentally to solve these crimes, these murders that have happened. So the love element, because it is romance too. So they're mysteries, but they're romance as well. So the whole romance thing is will they, won't they ever get together? So it's one of those things where some family members are intentionally trying to keep them apart and some are accidentally, perhaps. And then you have the love relationship, of course, between some of the older characters. And I really like what she did with some of the other characters and imagining their future, like Lady Catherine de Bourgh's daughter, who is so mistreated by her mother and potentially made sickly and kept too secluded. You see the trajectory of her life, which is fun and interesting. And, you know, we talk a little bit, Emily and I, sometimes about what is fan fiction, and are published novels considered fan fiction, or are there just stages of fan fiction?
I mean, I think it sounds like fan fiction. If you're taking characters from well-loved novels and creating new worlds for them, that feels like fan fiction to me, but I don't know what the true definition of it would be.
Yeah, I kind of think my issue sometimes is that fan fiction used to be so put down that it was people sitting at home on their computers writing up stories because they had nothing better to do, which is like, hello, like, why are you putting down people's creativity?
Right. Yeah.
So I think sometimes the fan fiction thing, it gets a little confusing because some people have picked up on the vibe that others have been put down for writing it. Whereas always you've had people who have been writing stories based in worlds that have already been established by someone else.
Right.
Because they enjoy it. And it, yeah.
Cool. Well, as I said, I read Liz Moore. I read Long Bright River. It was a book that was brought back to both of our attention during our last reading salon, I believe. And I didn't realize until I got the book, because I started with an audio, and then I quickly thought, I need to have this in my hands, because the way the author was starting the story, there were lists that the narrator was reading, and I thought, I need to see what all this means together. When I got the book and I looked at what other novels Liz Moore had written, I realized I read her novel Heft, which I loved. So that was kind of exciting, you know, when you don't put an author with previous reading that you've done. And that book was about this gentleman named Arthur who was living in his house, a recluse. He was weighing in at 550 pounds and hadn't left for a long time. And it took place in Brooklyn. And then he comes back into contact with an old student named Charlene and her son Kel. And it becomes this really beautiful novel about found family. And I just loved it. But this novel is Long Bright River. It's narrated by Allison Ryan. She did a great job narrating. And it's a police procedural, a crime story, a family drama. It takes place in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia, which is a real place. And it was hit really hard by the opioid epidemic. So at first I was like, oh, I don't know if I can read this right now, because I had just finished Demon Copperhead. Demon Copperhead, thank you. But this is a very different look at it. And it involves 2 sisters, Mickey and Casey. Both of their parents were lost to them due to addiction. And one becomes a cop, and then the other ends up struggling with addiction. It has some surprising plot twists. I think on our BookTube channel, when I talked about starting this book, I said one of the plot twists was that the cop sister goes missing. That was wrong.
Oh,
the sister with addiction goes missing. That's the problem, folks, with talking about books before you've read them.
Right.
Oops.
Yes.
But like Demon Copperhead, it straddles truth and fiction. It's a fictional story, but there is a lot of truth about the opioid epidemic. And one of the things that Liz Moore brings into this novel is medicated assisted treatment, and also police behaving badly, which wasn't part of Demon Copperhead. So they are very different. I really enjoyed it. And I know a lot of our listeners, I think in our top 10, I can't remember. I'm sorry, I don't remember what year this novel came out, but in our listener top 10, I believe Long Bright River made the cut that year.
Very cool. Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I think it did. So highly recommend. And it was a great audiobook, but I did like reading it hybridly. So.
Nice. Well, I finished A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I did not intend to read a Wilkie Collins and a Charles Dickens back to back. So it's kind of fun that it just turned out this way, because I guess there are two camps. Some people love Wilkie Collins and don't appreciate Charles Dickens, and vice versa. So it'll be fun to see how they pan out for me. I really enjoyed A Tale of Two Cities. I didn't know anything about it other than it was kind of about the French Revolution. It is indeed. It's a confusing novel at first because you don't really know what's going on, and you're not supposed to. You enter this world where things are happening. A man is in a stagecoach trying to get to the coast because he's going to Paris. He's a banker who's going to Paris, and a messenger on horseback catches up with the coach to say, "This is a note for you." And his response to the note is resurrected to life. And you're like, what? What's going on? So you find out that this man is a banker who's going to Paris to collect an old friend who has been imprisoned in France for a long time, quite wrongly. And he has a teenage daughter now. I think she's 18, the man who's imprisoned. So she arrives as well at this inn where they're spending the night before they take a ship over to the continent. So you start to understand a little bit what's going on, but then you're in Paris and there's a wine merchant, a husband and wife. They have a wine merchant business, and the woman is always knitting. And you find out that she is like some of the ancient Greek stories. She's knitting to tell a story. She's embedding this story in her knitting of what's going on and who's doing what. So it goes back and forth between London and Paris, who's doing what where. There's some double type characters and situations. And this book, A Tale of Two Cities, like Bleak House, there's very early on a courtroom scene where you're wondering what's going on. And then later, everything starts making sense. I did consult the notes. So I read the Penguin Classics edition. This is the one edited with an introduction and notes by Richard Maxwell. I didn't find the notes all that helpful sometimes because the footnote would refer you to another appendix or to some other work, which wasn't all that helpful. But there weren't too many notes either. I'm doing a buddy read with Sigrid on this one, and she did get the Norton critical edition of this, which, you know, those things are awesome. They have tons of great notes and then also essays about the text. So I look forward to talking with her. We're talking later this evening, you know, about how helpful some of those notes may have been. I mentioned the stagecoach. There is a scene about the man getting out of the stagecoach and shaking himself like a dog, and that the stagecoach itself smells like a dog kennel because it's a public coach and it's wintertime and it's wet. And they actually put straw down to help collect some of the moisture and mud and everything. So I just thought about that in terms of public transportation and why people who had their own private coaches were very fortunate to be able to afford that and not be crammed into a stinky coach with other people for God knows how long bouncing around.
We're lucky today to have our own coaches.
Oh my gosh, right? Nothing like being in your own car. So one of the things I love about reading these old classics is coming across phrases or words every now and then that you think like, what? Like they said that back then? And it always is surprising to me. In this case, there is a scene between two characters who are both quite common sense, very practical people. And it's the night before a wedding and they're feeling very emotional about it. And it's a scene between Miss Pross, who is kind of like a housekeeper companion to the family, and Mr. Laurie, who is that man who has been a faithful friend. He's the banker who had gone over to Paris to help bring his friend/client back. They're getting sentimental. And he says to her, well, but don't cry. And she says, I'm not crying. You are. I'm like, what? I was like, what? Like I bolted up in my chair, like, what? I'm not crying. You are. Like that is the contemporary meme that has been so popular. I was just shocked to see it in a book from 1859.
And what does it mean?
I'm not crying, you're crying. Well, it's kind of like a deflective thing that in this case, like she's saying, I'm not crying, you are, like to deflect her own emotion. And they're both crying. So the whole I'm not crying, you're crying. I did a little brief research on the internet, which, you know how that goes. I didn't see any origins of this phrase other than it being attributed to a Starsky and Hutch movie from 2004. This is a common thing that's today to say like, I'm not crying, you're crying. Now it's become a funny meme. You haven't seen this one?
No.
Oh, wow. Okay. I've seen it a lot on different social media things.
It's the first time that it was ever written was in A Tale of Two Cities?
That's what it looks like. It became a popular meme after 2004. I think in like 2017 is when it really took off. And so it's just like a structure that people have used for like emotional memes. But I was surprised to see it attributed to Starsky and Hutch. And then on that site that I saw, Digital Cultures, the author also says a possible origin for the expression could be Charles Dickens' 1859 novel, A Tale of Two Cities. So it was just really fun to see that. And then, you know, you got to wonder, like, who is the writer or writers of the Starsky and Hutch script? And did they get that from Charles Dickens? Or did one of them read it way back in high school and it was just floating around their subconscious until they needed something to fit the scene and it popped out?
So don't you want to see the scene in Starsky and Hutch now?
I did look at the clip.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, I did look at the clip because the source that I found, they described it as a phrase that is used as a humorous way for men to cover up their tears and their emotional vulnerability. I'm not crying, you're crying, you know. I just think it's interesting that the first time the words were recorded, as far as we can tell at this point, were put in a woman's mouth by a man. So
interesting. Wow.
Yeah. And the Starsky and Hutch, I never saw that movie. I loved the original series.
Oh, me too.
So I didn't want to have my memories tarnished by that movie.
Right.
But it's like it's two guys in a hospital and one of them says, are you crying? And he's like, I'm not crying, you're crying. And then the guy hugs him. He says, it's okay to cry. And he hugs him and he starts sobbing. But then the other guy's like, okay, that's enough. We all, I think, are aware of the gender differences between who can cry and who's not allowed to cry or shouldn't be crying, which is really sad to look at it as a gender issue. Really enjoyed it. It was a hard book to read at times. Dickens' prose is very convoluted at times, and other times he describes things really wonderfully. But it is about the French Revolution, so the storming of the Bastille, and then the terror. So there's death and dying and hard things happening with the guillotine being introduced. But that, my friends, is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Who can't recommend Dickens?
I feel like that's a setup for me for my next novel.
This episode is sponsored by
The Anguish of Alzheimer's, The Years of Mom's Dementia, a memoir by Anne Watt. Suspicions warned Anne that something was amiss in Mom's life. She learned that Alzheimer's disease was eroding her mother's mind. Mom's descent into dementia notified her daughter of one thing. The parent was now the child who needed care and protection. Anne Watt's memoir, The Anguish of Alzheimer's, was written for caregivers. Her unforgettable story will help you shed tears that will cleanse and refresh your heart and soul. Head to the show notes for more information about Anne and her memoir. Well, after reading Demon Copperhead, I needed a palate cleanser and I picked up Swan Song thanks to our mystery man, John Valeri, who I saw had put a beautiful copy in his little free library. And Chris just happened to have dinner plans with him coming up. So he held the book for me and put it in Chris's hands. And then I got it in my hands. And this is called Swan Song because it is the final book that she's writing in her Nantucket book series, which I went back and forth looking at Goodreads and Amazon and other places. I thought there were like series within her series, and this was the fourth one in that. I think that was all wrong. I think all of her books have been on the island of Nantucket, or at least have characters from the island of Nantucket in them, I believe. I've read 2 other novels of hers before. She has a lot. She has announced that she is retiring with this novel, but her daughter is in boarding school and her daughter has been calling her with so many stories. She and her daughter have sold a book deal to write 2 books about a boarding school. So
Cool.
she's semi-retired, I think is the way to say it. This takes place on Nantucket. A very wealthy couple has come to town. They've purchased a house, a mansion that's been for sale for quite some time. It was listed for something like $20+ million. People aren't buying it because the environmental study that was done on it says that with global warming and the sea rise, this house will be underwater soon. So most people aren't buying it. This is a very wealthy couple with no children. They say they don't care. It's not going to happen in their lifetime. To give you an idea of their feelings around money, they purchased a yacht called Hedonism. So that should give you an idea of maybe their moral compass. But, Nantucket is an island. So I think part of what Ellen Hildebrand has done with these novels is there are a cast of characters that show up every now and again. So I imagine if you've read all of her novels, there are Easter eggs throughout this book that I probably missed because I'm just picking it up. All of her novels are standalones, but I did hear an interview with her where she said, if you've been following my whole career, you will understand some other characters here. So the Richardsons come to town. They purchased this house. They had met a woman on an island where they were before they moved named Coco. They hire her to come to Nantucket to kind of be their Girl Friday. And when she gets to town, they haven't moved in yet. So right away, you kind of get a tone of how they're going to treat her because they're like, well, just go find some place to stay until the house is ready. Well, if you know Nantucket, that's no easy task. The hotels run anywhere from $500 to $3,000 a night. So by good luck, she ends up meeting someone else who has been raised in town and she offers her a place to stay. Eventually, Coco moves into the mansion and they start throwing these extravagant parties and other members of the community want to join. And things don't go well because people start to get jealous or some people see through the Richardsons for who they really are. And eventually Coco goes missing. So the novel starts to go back and forth in time, interviewing people after this yacht trip on hedonism where
God.
Coco went missing.
Mm.
So I loved it. I listened to it on audio and read the novel. It's narrated by Erin Bennett. And Erin Bennett apparently has been narrating her novel since 2012.
Oh, cool.
And at the end of the audiobook, there was an interview between them. They had never met in person, which I thought was so interesting. And so Erin talks about the experience of how her life has changed through the years of narrating Ellen's novels, which was really fun. Like, I got married, I had a baby, I this, I that. And also Ellen talked a little bit about her writing process. She writes all these novels by hand on notebooks, and then she writes them again, and then she writes them again, and then eventually transcribes them to computer.
Wow.
So that part was really interesting. She's a great writer, a really compelling, good writer. I really enjoyed it. So if you're looking for something that's beachy and is a real love letter to Nantucket, which is a place I've never been, I think you'll enjoy it. Again, it's called Swan Song by Ellen Hildebrand.
It's nice to have a happy, fun book that just takes you away.
Yeah. Demon Copperhead and Long Bright River were both really good, but heavy subject matter.
Yes, and that's a great transition for my next book that I'm going to talk about, which is That Librarian, The Fight Against Book Banning in America by Amanda Jones. This is a book that I listened to on audio through Libro FM. And I got a hard copy. I'm showing Emily the hardcover I bought because she mentions names and resources and stuff. And I thought I want to get the hardcover as well, which is out now. So, wow. Amanda Jones is a middle school librarian and educator in Louisiana who was targeted by a well-organized group in a smear campaign. There was a library board meeting for her local library, for her public library, and she's a school librarian, but she's a member of the community and a library user, and she's won awards as a librarian and has lived in this community her whole life. So she wanted to go to this board meeting where somebody was challenging some books. And it was really kind of unclear what the books were and what the topic was exactly about this meeting. But when she arrived, I'm not going to name the names of these people, this one man in particular, who is the one in Louisiana who started a lot of the attacks against libraries and librarians, completely smeared her. So she gave this speech, a wonderful written speech, defending books and being against censorship, mentioning that libraries already have systems in place for how to have books be reconsidered. A couple days later, it might have even been the next day, there's this huge smear campaign that started on Facebook attacking her and saying that she supported pornography in schools, books that would teach 11-year-olds how to have anal sex and things like that. You know, the common lies and hysteria that you hear, people taking books out of context, people thinking that adult books are accessible to children when they're actually shelved in the adult section, not the children's section. But they were vicious in attacking her, and it really took a toll. One of the saddest things for her was seeing people she'd known her whole life jumping on the bandwagon, saying awful things. She narrates the audiobook, which is really good to hear her voice, but it was heartbreaking. And that opening where she's talking about what happened to her and the toll it took was pretty hard to listen to. Throughout subsequent chapters, she talks about the lawsuit and how things were going with that and just the challenges with that. Throughout the book, as an audio listener, I felt that there was some repetition in what she was saying and how she was saying it. But this is a book that she wrote. This attack on her happened in 2022. It's now 2024. So she wrote this book in part as part of her own healing and to get the word out as a memoir of what happened to her and how it happened. And then also to provide advice and guidance on how other librarians, educators, people who care about the freedom to read and access to information, steps that you can take to fight back and be preemptively ready if that kind of situation should come to your town or to you specifically as a librarian. I happened to see a clip from the Today Show with Hoda and Jenna. They had Ann Patchett on recently, who was talking about her new kids book called The Verts, a story of introverts and extroverts, which sounds fantastic. The illustrations just look so very detailed and colorful. They also had Anne recommend 3 nonfiction books for this fall. And That Librarian is one of them that Ann Patchett spoke so highly about. So I think this is going to be a very popular book among book lovers and people who care about what's going on in the efforts to censor books. And Nonfiction November is coming up. So if you're thinking about adding a little bit more nonfiction to your reading life, this would probably be a good one to go for.
Yeah.
So again, it's That Librarian by Amanda Jones.
I finished a novel that I knew nothing about. I think I've mentioned that if I'm suffering from insomnia, one of the things that's been helping me lately is audiobooks. But sometimes I'm looking for an audiobook in the middle of the night because I've finished one. So that's how I came across this one. I went to Libro FM and looked at books that were in my library, and this was one of them. And it's called The Secret Life of Albert Entwistle by Matt Cain. And it's narrated by Simon Vance,
Oh,
who was our
awesome.
guest on a previous episode of the podcast. I'll put that link in the show notes. Oh my gosh, does he do a great job narrating this novel? This is a romance, which I didn't know when I started listening to it. It's set in the UK. Albert is a postie, a mail carrier, sneaking up on his 65th birthday. He arrives at work at 5:45 in the morning. He tries not to engage any of his coworkers in conversation or really even look them in the eye. Even the townies he delivers to, he tries to just kind of drop and run. And he doesn't really speak to his neighbors. He really keeps to himself. And the holidays come and he's home alone with his cat, and his cat gets sick and he has to put her down. He also gets a letter from the post office saying, "Oh, you're going to be retiring soon." And from what I took from this story, like, maybe you don't get a choice in the UK. You get to that age and they're like, "Okay, thank you for your service." So he starts to realize, oh, my life's going to get really quiet. I've built this really quiet life and now my cat isn't here. So I'm really going to be alone. And he starts to try to challenge himself in a self-help kind of way to put himself out there a little bit more. And as he does that, you start to learn his backstory and why he has become somewhat reclusive. I mean, he's out in the world, obviously, but he's shut down. That's probably the better way to say it emotionally. And you start to realize that his backstory is that he's gay. And when he was a teenager, his father was a police officer that took great pleasure in catching men who were visiting with each other in public restrooms, which was happening frequently back in the 70s and 80s where he was growing up. The story intertwines these lovely times that Albert is having with a teenage boy that he has met that recently moved to town. And then the fear that he has because he has this overbearing father that's making it very clear how he feels about Albert's choices, even though he doesn't know that those are Albert's choices. They're being kept secret. So what the story does, it's really one of those found family stories where if you open yourself up to people that are near to you that you're maybe not paying attention to, your life can broaden and be pleasant in lovely ways. And one of the women that he befriends is a teenage mother, and they really start to help each other and start to share each other's burdens and really help each other face the world. And as he does that, more characters come into his life, including the people he's been working with all these years. I loved this novel so much. It's such a feel-good novel. I believe it was Matt Cain's debut. And at the end of the audiobook, and I did read it and listen to it, at the end of the audiobook, there's an interview with Matt Cain and some of the men that he interviewed who are older gay men now, but who talk really about the 70s and 80s and gay liberation and the work that they did to help the youth of today live differently, hopefully, depending on where they're living. And I really appreciated those interviews because they asked some really good questions, and I learned a lot by reading the novel and listening to the interviews at the end.
Oh, that's great that they included the interviews.
Yeah, I loved this novel. It was such a pleasant surprise, you know, when you just scroll through your library and start something. I mean, part of it was Simon's, like, I really felt like I was being told a story by an expert storyteller, both by the way it was written and the way it was performed. So again, it's called The Secret Life of Albert Entwistle, narrated by Simon Vance, written by Matt Cain.
Biblio Adventures.
Y'all, buckle up your seatbelts. We went on some major joint jaunts. I feel like we were flying by Biblio Adventures. Like, I can't explain it.
Yeah, it was a busy week or two.
Yeah.
We had a lot of pent up lack of Biblio Adventures. Like, I guess you can't pent something up that's lacking. We didn't see each other for most of the summer. So when Emily got back into town and, you know, we had some things lined up, we just jumped into it with so much relish and enjoyment. Yes. First up, we had our event with James Benn. at the Mystic Noank Library. That's an event that was co-sponsored with Bank Square Books. Had a wonderful conversation with Jim.
Yeah, and his book, The Phantom Patrol, is out now. It's the 19th book in the Billy Boyle series. This library is so beautiful. It was not a hardship to sit in this beautiful space and talk to him. He had a great turnout, including our friend and listener, Karen, who drove all the way from Maine to join us that night. It was so great to see her.
So great to see her. And Karen is Barker for Books on Instagram. For those of you who are on Instagram, you may have seen the photo we posted with her. Because last year we all met up in Salem and we did a funny photo in the library trying to replicate an image. And that happened again at the Mystic Noank Library. There was a portrait of three sisters. One was carrying a plant, one had her arms crossed, and the other one had a whip. So we kind of recreated that, and you can see an image of that on social media.
Yes, we had a good time. Maybe if we remember, we can put it in next month's newsletter too. For those of you
that'd
who
be
aren't
fun.
on social media.
Yeah, but the event was so good, and there were people there. I mean, this is the 19th Billy Boyle mystery. There are people who have been reading every one of the books as they come out, and, it's just getting better and better, that series.
Really fun. And people asked great questions. They made our job easy.
They sure did. Yeah.
And part of the reason that the event was being hosted in the library is because Bank Square Books was in the middle of a move. They moved the bookstore from downtown Mystic to Stonington, which is just a town over, not far at all. So the bookstore was open to 8:00. So after the event, we decided to hop in the car and run over there really quickly and check out the new store.
Yeah. And it's really a nice space. It's very, it's like the end store in a tiny strip mall. There are just a couple storefronts, I think. They have their whale out front. People who are familiar with Bank Square Books know the whale that has been out front of their store for a long time. And the inside of the store is really large. It's a big rectangle space. It is a modern construction. But the way they have everything laid out, you move wonderfully through it. So many of their book shelves, the shelving and display carts are on wheels. So they can really move things however they need to when they have events. I think it's going to be a fantastic event space.
Yeah, and they also have parking, which is one of the issues in downtown Mystic where the old store resided. So I think that the people who shop there are going to really appreciate free parking right in front of the store so they can buy bags and bags of books.
Exactly. Yeah. We'd had a good browse. I mean, we didn't have much time because it did close at 8 and we got there a little bit before 8, but still we did a really nice overview of all their different sections. Lots of great sidelines, but then fantastic sections too. Mm-hmm. I did buy a book. I bought The Militia House. I don't remember the author, but that one stood out to me in the horror section, and it's set in Afghanistan. There's an old Russian barracks that might be haunted, that a unit of American military personnel, I don't remember what branch, get embroiled in. I plan on reading that one for the spooky season, and we plan on going back for events and more shopping.
For sure. And then we also went to the Windham-Campbell Festival on Friday. It was the last day of the festival. We parked in downtown New Haven, where it takes place at Yale campus, and came across the Possible Futures Bookstore Bikemobile.
Yes.
And did some shopping there before we'd barely stepped foot on campus. I bought a copy. We were heading to Hanif Abdurrakheb's event. Unbeknownst to us, they were giving out the book there. I didn't know that, so I bought a copy, which I was happy to do, called There's Always This Year on Basketball and Ascension.
Yeah, and I bought a copy of Nine No Place by Jen Hatfield, a poet who was one of the award recipients.
Yeah, and Hanif's event took place at
the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library.
Beautiful setting for an event. We've gone to see exhibits, but I've never seen a live event there. The Beinecke has these thin marble walls, so when the sun is shining, it just glows. So we were looking at Hanif in conversation with, was it James Jones?
Yes.
Is that his name?
James Jones, who's the head coach of the Yale basketball team and one of the most winning coaches. I think he is the most winning coach in Yale basketball history.
Well, and he did a great job talking with Hanif. I loved the conversation.
Yeah, it was a fantastic conversation. It was so inspiring. I left feeling so good about life and humanity. But it was really kind of funny because Hanif did a 7-minute reading and he was really precise when he said 7 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then he moved the podium up a little bit away from the wall because he's like, I sometimes kick out when I read and I don't want to break an ankle. So he did this reading that was paced like a basketball game. You know how you have that stylized poetic way of reading? It wasn't quite like that. It was so much faster. And just the pacing was amazing. And he read 2 different sections of the book. So that was a really great start. But one of the first questions that James Jones asked was about Michael Jordan and LeBron and who was the better basketball player.
Yes.
Which got a lot of oohs from the crowd. So I waited for his response with bated breath. And he actually said that Hanif is about the body of work, the overall body of work. He said, I have to go with Jordan as the better overall player.
Right. And it had to do with how many conference championships he had. I had a conversation with my son, Jacob, about this whole thing because I told him I'm going to send him Hanif's book. And Jacob had his opinions, which I don't need to share. But I thought it was really interesting. Like, this seems like it's a very heated thing to ask people about.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like he said, he has seen both of their careers.
Right.
And younger people didn't get to see Michael Jordan play.
Right.
So they don't really understand Michael Jordan. And in terms of Chicago sports, it's like not having seen Walter Payton run on the Bears, because Sweetness was his nickname. And that's exactly what it was to see him run. So anyway, it was really fun to see a lot of people show up for a sports book. And I guess I was surprised by the humor. There was so much humor because at one point, somebody in the audience asked a question about getting published. Hanif said that the pitch that he made to the publisher for this book was that it was going to be about the Ohio time with LeBron James. And they were like, okay. And he was like, it meant nothing. This had no meaning at all, but it got accepted. And so
he was a known quantity at this point when he was pitching this. But then he was like, but then I realized I had to write the book, which is a drag too. Yeah. But what he's referring to is when LeBron James left the Cavs and the devastation that wrought on Cleveland, which was real. I mean,
economically,
yeah, it was a really tough time. And that then there were people like, we never want to see him come back. They were really mad. And then when he came back, they were happy to have him back. But he was talking about real things, it's not, and I don't mean just, I'm saying just in air quotes, about the game of basketball. It was much more deep than that.
Yes, absolutely. And he talked about his life. One of the fascinating things that he mentioned was how he'd been in trouble with the law. As the judge said to him, you keep getting arrested. So you have an option, do 6 months or a year community service. And he wanted to just do the 6 months in prison and get it over with. But luckily he had a good public defender who said, we'll take the volunteer time. And so he did that. He was volunteering at a senior center, and just the impact that had on him, because he's like, the point was that they didn't expect him to improve or be better than he was at the time. They just wanted him to show up and be reliable. Like, that's all he needed to do was show up and be reliable. And he's still volunteering there.
Right. He said within a couple of weeks, nothing could get in the way of him showing up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like, just how amazing that is, and how important that message is just like, just being there is what it's about.
Right.
You don't have to be a superstar. You just need to show up and be reliable. I love that message.
Yeah. And the thing about humor with him, even when he was introducing this part of his life story, he said, I kept getting arrested. Obviously, I wasn't a very good thief.
Right. Yes.
So really lovely man. It was a great conversation. And I enjoyed his reading of the book so much that I also did purchase a copy of the audiobook when I got home.
Oh, very good.
So I'm going to plan to read that hybridly very soon.
Yeah, and you know what? He has a podcast as well called Object of Sound. One of the episodes I listened to was about the sounds of where you come from. And he interviews different people because he's really into music and words and rhythm, obviously. So it was a fascinating episode. And I don't know how he does his seasons, but I hope he keeps putting out more. And in the interim, I have back episodes to listen to. But I do want to just say one more thing about his writing and something he shared during this event, that his mom passed away suddenly and unexpectedly, and that he and his brother didn't know that she'd been a writer, and they found a bunch of her writing. And what really surprised him was that he uses so many similar phrases in his own writing that his mom used in hers. That just gave me goosebumps to hear that. So just exploring that legacy of parental impact and family language, and even just who you're around. Great event. Really so much better than I imagined. I wasn't sure what to expect because I haven't read him. I had just listened to that podcast episode, but one of the best events I've attended in a long time, I have to say. Yeah.
Really, really great.
This episode is sponsored by
Not Yours to Keep by Zelly Ruskin. Billy is an adoption specialist with fertility issues who dreams of adopting a baby, her pregnant client's baby. Her husband, Tyler, is keeping secrets. He has doubts about fatherhood, and someone is sending upsetting anonymous texts. When the client's newborn is abducted, Billy becomes a prime suspect. Tyler uncovers a link between the person tormenting him and the abduction, but then Billy disappears. Will they find them both before it's too late? Head to the show notes for more information about Zelly and her debut novel, Not Yours to Keep. Then we also went to Chester, Connecticut for the grand opening of Montgomery and Taggert, a new and first romance bookstore in the state of Connecticut.
Yes, we were there for their grand opening. We got there in the afternoon, and wow, their bookshelves were already looking pretty bare. They were flabbergasted at how many people showed up and how many books were being purchased. They were just overwhelmed by the support from the community.
And I kept hearing them say, "So sorry we're out of that book, but we'd be happy to order it for you if you live locally."
Yes, yes.
So they put on their Instagram, which they were kind of alluding to when we were there. They ended up having to close a couple days of their first week after this grand opening weekend to restock the shelves. We wish them just tremendous success. It's located in Chester, which is a lovely New England town. And it's in just a little slightly outside of the downtown in a beautiful house.
Yeah. Really walkable, really
nice.
close to the parking for downtown,
yes.
And lots of good places to eat.
Yes. We also hosted our reading salon with our Patreons.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun. We talked about all sorts of things, including genre. But we did decide, it was voted, that our next reading salon, which we want to remind people takes place on Sunday, October 27th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. People decided they wanted to just bring books to share this time.
Yeah.
So if you haven't joined one of our reading salons and you are currently a Patreon at the $5 and above level, you are welcome to join us. If you aren't a Patreon, this would be a great time to become one. If you're a Patreon at the $1 level or more, you could upgrade to the $5 level just for a month even to try out the reading salon if you'd like to join us. We're a friendly group.
Yeah, totally. We are a bunch of book nerds if you haven't gathered. So lots of great recommendations. Yeah, really looking forward to that next salon. And since it's so close to Halloween, people, you're welcome to wear a costume if you like.
Yes.
And if you're not into costumes, no pressure.
And speaking of costumes, the other kind of unexpected Biblio adventure we did was to go to a local theater that's just the town over from where we live called Legacy Theater. It's in Branford, Connecticut, to see Dracula, a comedy of terrors.
Or errors.
Oh, I thought it was Terrors. Is it
I think
Errors?
I think it might be. Let me double check. Let's see.
That's so funny.
Oh, it is a comedy of terrors. Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Well, it was also a comedy of errors, kind of. I mean, not in
It
the like
was, right?
prissy way, but oh my gosh. I don't think I have laughed so much and so hard in a very, very long time. This was a
Yes.
fun performance.
It was really fun. And I had seen that this was on like just off Broadway last year in Manhattan. So when it was coming here, it was the Connecticut debut of the play here. I'm so happy we got to go see it. It was the last weekend, so we just squeaked it in, but so funny. It's one of those plays where there are some actors who play dual roles. So part of the fun is seeing them come in and out as different characters. And with one of them, it gets really kind of frantic, but super fun.
Yes. And there's wigs and costume changes that happen really quickly. And also, I just loved the staging.
Yeah.
It's a small stage. They were very creative, but in a humorous way with how they staged it. And that was part of the fun for me too.
Yeah. Like, and they really spoofed with love so many Dracula things and horror tropes that were just a lot of fun. The only thing I have to say is that one thing I didn't appreciate is that Mina Harker, who is a kick-ass character in the novel, it's played by a man who's dressed as a woman, who's very tall, and is the ugly sister to Lucy, who's the pretty blonde sister. In the book, they're not sisters. I didn't appreciate that Mina was portrayed as a sex-starved, ugly woman. I just thought that was a little dated and surprising for a new play. But it is kind of like that vaudeville vibe. So it is vibing on that tradition within theater.
And I have to say, I loved that character, but I've never read the novel.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to see it with Chris. I just thought that actor did such a good job. I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
It didn't bother me because I didn't know that Mina in the novel is portrayed differently.
Yeah. What bothered me is just portraying a woman in general as a sex-starved, ugly person. I don't find humor in that, but I really like the actor's performance. I thought he was fantastic in both of his roles. The other role that he plays is as Dr. Van Helsing as a woman.
So good.
Yeah. One of the funny scenes is that there's another doctor who is the father of Lucy, who isn't really present as a character in the book. They take another character and kind of mash them together. He's a traditional 19th century man. And they're like, Dr. Van Helsing is here. And it's like, where? What, a woman? No, that's not Dr. Van Helsing. You know, so there's some great gender tropes that are played upon and realistic, would you say it, prejudices or the limitations that are placed on women are portrayed with a good sense of humor.
Right.
You know, to make people think like you laugh and then you think like, oh, right. Yeah, that shit's still going on.
And they also have, you know, like they bring in current politics into it. And so it's very of the moment as well.
Yes, like really of the moment. One of the things that they changed was a line about being in Springfield and the cats and the dogs being drained. Very current because that was just happening in real life, as they say. And you just wonder how the playwright wrote that. If they wrote an original gag, but then insert current political ridiculous situation here kind of thing, you know?
Really, if it comes to a neighborhood near you, we highly recommend you see it. Really
Lots of fun. It is being picked up other places, I believe. Yeah, we really had a fabulous couple weeks there, didn't we?
So much fun. Yeah. And I just want to alert you to another podcast that I listened to. Kelly Corrigan Wonders is doing a series called Shook by a Book, where she talks to people about a book that was very influential in their lives. And she talked to Congressman Katie Porter about The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And it was a really good conversation. For those of you who don't know, especially if you're not in the United States, Katie Porter is known as a very no-nonsense, get down to brass tacks congresswoman. She often brings a whiteboard to hearings and really holds people accountable for their actions and the words that they say. And she's a mother of three. She is known for driving a minivan and being very hard-hitting. And so she talks a lot about wealth and class, which is a common theme in The Great Gatsby, and also about politics and her life growing up. She was born and raised in Iowa, but ended up, which I didn't know this, at a very highfalutin boarding school as a teenager in the Boston area. So she talks about that experience. I really enjoyed the conversation. So I'll put a link in the show notes to that. Again, it's Kelly Corrigan Wonder's conversation with Katie Porter about The Great Gatsby.
Oh.
And she's interviewing other people with other books, but that's the only one I've listened to.
Oh, that sounds really fun.
So do you have any upcoming jaunts on the calendar?
Well, just the one that you and I have talked about doing next Wednesday, we are going to the Eric Carle Picture Book Museum and the Montague Book Mill, both in Massachusetts. They're central Massachusetts. We've been to the Montague Book Mill before. We're not sure how the timing is going to work out, but we know that they have a restaurant there, or cafe, I should say. So we're hoping maybe to grab a meal there. I'm really looking forward to going on a nice long ride. You know, the trees may be past peak already by next week. It's been a quick leaf season here, I feel like.
Yeah, there wasn't quite enough water. The gentleman caller and I spontaneously, as I said, drove from Connecticut to Michigan on Sunday. And this could have been the most beautiful drive, but they've had a real drought. Michigan, but also I think New York and everybody along the way. We've seen some colors, but it's not like some years that we've had. So we'll have to see, because we are doing a route up to Mass that could be really beautiful if there are still leaves changing.
Yeah.
So I also have one on the calendar with Betsy Lerner in conversation with Roxanne Cody at RJ Julia on October 8th at 6 p.m. That's the day this episode drops. Betsy Lerner has a new novel. It's her debut novel out called Shred Sisters. She's written 2 memoirs. One is called Food and Loathing, which I had never heard of, but I had heard of The Bridge Ladies, which is a memoir she wrote when she was visiting her mother as she was getting older, and she got to know her mother through this group of women that she played bridge with. And then she also wrote a book for writers, Chris, which I didn't know about, called The Forest for the Trees.
Oh, interesting.
Because she's a longtime editor and literary agent. And I think it's from an editor's perspective of how writers can succeed, what would help them to be published. So I'm looking forward to that conversation and to reading her first novel, The Shred Sisters.
So what about upcoming reads? What's on your list?
Well, Trial by Ambush, Murder, Injustice, and the Truth About the Case of Barbara Graham. This book will be published on December 1st. We think. They keep changing the publication date, but that's the last one I've read. It's written by Marcia Clark, who's been a guest in the past and is going to be a guest in the future. This is a true crime book about a sensational killing that took place in the 1950s. And I believe Barbara Graham was accused of the murder, but Marcia Clark digs into the case and reveals some untruths, I believe.
Yes. And our mystery man, John Valeri, helped with the research on that book. So he will be a guest as well when we have Marcia on next. I can't wait. Can't wait to dig into the book, and I can't wait to talk with both of them about it.
Yeah.
That is on my list. And then also another book I recently picked up. So it was the end of September, and I went into Breakwater Books, our local independent bookstore, and I blew my October book budget. But I'm happy about it. And one of the books I purchased was The Bookshop, A History of the American Bookstore by Evan Friss. And
Great cover.
Isn't it beautiful? It's a storefront with green wood trim and then looking into a bookstore. So you see the shelves. Wonderful cover. And I've read some really good reviews about it. And I can't wait to dig into this one. It's going to be, I think, a nice one for Nonfiction November.
Yes. And I have one other one. Listeners, you might remember on the last episode, I was talking about my love of the series Slow Horses that's based on the novels by Mick Herron. And I was like, hemming and hawing. Am I going to read the series? Am I not? Because I'm loving the television show so much. I always want to read the book first, don't we all? Right.
Mm-hmm.
But the gentleman caller was on a bike ride the other day and went past a little free library and then came and got me. And we got in the car and he drove me to this little free library. And there was a pristine copy of the first novel in the series, which is called Slow Horses. So I couldn't resist and I picked it up. So we'll see if I decide to read it.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll stay tuned.
Yes. Also coming up in upcoming reads is our Q4 read along. Did you guys think that we'd forgotten? If you've made it this far, good for you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. We had such a struggle picking this fourth book in our year of reading romance. There are just so many romances out there, and it's such a fantastic problem to have that there are so many great writers, so many great books. But in keeping with how we're trying to explore the genre, we thought, since we've had three really big powerhouse writers in the genre, for the last book, we wanted to go with a debut novel from a newer writer.
Right. And we also wanted to choose a man.
Yes.
And we also wanted to choose a book that was available on audio because we know a lot of you listen via audiobook. And a lot of novels, particularly debut novels, are not put out in multiple.
Yeah, there's not wide availability of formats.
Right.
And we also wanted to read one that had a little bit more diversity.
So, should we say the title?
Drum roll. The title is A Little Bit Country by Brian D. Kennedy.
This is also a YA novel. So we covered so many bases. We have a YA square on our romance bingo card. We also obviously have a Q4 square on our romance bingo card.
And an LGBTQ IA square.
Maybe we'll let people double down on this one if they want. You can make it be 2 squares.
You could. It could be as many squares as you want. I don't think we have a country music square. But the thing about this novel that also attracted us is that it's about two young guys who are polar opposites who meet at a country western amusement park, very much like Dollywood in Tennessee, Dolly Parton's amusement park.
And we love ourselves some Dolly Parton here at the Book Cougars. So we thought that would be a lot of fun. It is important to remind you that it's a YA novel. So keep that in mind as you're reading. YA novels can be different, a little bit lighter, therefore a different audience than older people.
Yeah, there's definitely not going to be scenes like you read in Envy.
Right.
When it comes to the main character's expressions of love.
Right. Well said, Chris. It seems to be readily available in libraries, so we're hoping that you read along with us. The read along Zoom discussion will take place on Sunday, December 8th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Send us an email at bookcougars@gmail.com if you'd like to join the conversation.
Super excited. All right.
Super excited. In the Out Now category, these are books that we've talked about on the podcast in the past, but they were far from pub date, so we want to remind you about them. The Bog Wife by Kay Chronister, American Scary, A History of Horror from Salem to Stephen King and Beyond by Jeremy Dauber, and The Mighty Red by Louise Erdrich.
So everyone, coming up next, we have an interview with playwright Laura Thoma.
Chris's wife. It's very exciting. She's putting on a play that's going to be performed in December. Tickets are available now. There's information in the show notes for how you can purchase them.
Yes. And the play is Miss Margaret's Barton Cottage Christmas. It is set in the Jane Austen world of Sense and Sensibility. Laura's been our guest before with some of her other writing projects. We'll put those in the show notes as well. And we hope you enjoy this conversation. Happy reading.
We are excited to welcome back Laura Thoma, who was our first Author Spotlight guest way back on episode 19. She also joined us on episode 127, where she talked about her play Magpie. And on episode 66, we featured the world premiere of her radio play, Yours in Words, which dropped on Christmas Day. Laura is an internationally published playwright and award-winning short film writer. Most recently, she's been a resident of the Desert Playwrights Retreat and The Outrage, a queer writer's residency. Her work has been developed with various theaters and organizations, including the Bechtel Group, Cape May Stage, and the North American Cultural Laboratory. She is also a co-founder of Shoreline Playwrights. Laura is here today to talk about the upcoming production of her new play, Miss Margaret's Barton Cottage Christmas Surprise. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, and well done with that title.
It is a tongue twister, yes. So, Laura, can you tell us about this new play of yours? What is it about?
I certainly can. It is a play that takes place in Jane Austen's world of Sense and Sensibility 8 years after Sense and Sensibility ends. It's focused around Margaret Dashwood, who is the youngest of the Dashwood sisters, and her love interest, which we can't say much about because it's a secret, but there's confusion, there's mistaken identity. It's a festive holiday romp, and Margaret will have to learn to accept her true self to save Christmas.
Very nice. All right, that was very succinct.
And also somewhat mysterious.
Yes.
I like that.
Okay,
Wonderful.
oh good.
And we'll give you all details again at the end, but we want to say that the production for this is at DramaWorks Theater in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, December 13th to the 21st, 2024. So we'll have links in the show notes too about how to get your tickets.
Wonderful.
Laura, on your website, you say that you create and explore women-centric stories of queerness, aging, intergenerational connectedness, mental health, and hope, and that you aspire to write stories that are sacred mirrors to others who do not feel seen. Can you talk a little bit about this?
Sure.
And I guess a follow-on question is, if two questions weren't enough already, is does this appear in this play that we're here to talk about?
Queerness definitely appears in it. There's intergenerational connectedness. There's not much about aging in this play or mental health, but intergenerational has become a real thing for me, and realizing how important when I was younger, older women were to me. And now the reverse, wanting to really make sure that I value and connect and validate younger women and their experience. Because I think often, both ways, young people can dismiss older women and vice versa. And I think it's just so important that we lean into each other. We have a lot to learn.
Yeah, that's for sure. So talk about the sacred mirrors. Is that what you mean by that? That you can mirror things to younger people and younger people can mirror to older? Or is that talking about something else?
I think that can be a part of it, absolutely. Sacred mirrors in general for me mean the safe spaces and places where we are actually reflected. So if I was speaking to a young woman, that I would be able to reflect back to her without judgment or thinking I know better. And it's not just about age or being a woman. It's anything for anyone. It's having that safe space where someone reflects you back. And it's very rare these days to feel reflected, to have somebody truly listen to you and reflect back what you're expressing or experiencing. Yeah. So that's my goal.
That's your goal in your playwriting as well?
It is, so that people will see themselves. So in Miss Margaret, which is what we call it for short because it is a long title, but in Miss Margaret, I love Jane Austen. I was such an Austen fan, and I never saw myself in that world. And we all know that there were queer people in that time in that world. They just weren't written about. So it's so important to me to have that sacred mirror for people who also love Austen, and to create the period piece of having queer women in that story, which now they're starting to have on Bridgerton too. So I was ahead of my time.
That's great. Love that. So why a Christmas play in particular, or a holiday play, we should say?
Because I heard playwright Lauren Gunderson say, if you want to get your work produced, write a Christmas play. Now, I will say I think it's very different. Being a queer play, I do think I've already hit a challenge, and I'm very grateful to DramaWorks for being willing to produce it. But the idea is, trying to diversify Christmas, and every theater does a Christmas play usually. It's a moneymaker. Like in the old world I came from, ballet, the Nutcracker was many companies. That's how they funded the rest of their season, was doing the Nutcracker. So
interesting, that big holiday bash. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Huh. When did you notice that you weren't seeing yourself in Jane Austen's world?
I noticed very early. I think Laura Ingalls Wilder, I felt seen there, even though that's not queer, but I felt, particularly in the books, somewhat in the television show, she was a tomboy. She was in the dirt. She played with bugs. She learned to spit. Mr. Edwards taught her how to spit. But then I don't know if I knew it right away. I just knew something was missing. And then once queer things started to come out, there are like 2 Christmas movies we watch that are lesbian Christmas movies, and we watch them 1,000 times every season. And once you start to watch it, you start to realize, wow, how good it feels and how much you did miss just a bad, I'm putting quotation marks as though you can see, but, quote unquote, bad movies. Like, we all deserve to have bad movies, right? That are fun and where we see ourselves. So I don't know. I think once I started seeing them, I started to notice it even more. I mean, I always knew I wasn't there, but I wouldn't have necessarily said, oh, I'm not being represented.
Yeah.
And then I heard a young skier. I think I said this on another podcast with you. Gosh, 2 Olympics ago. I believe she was an American skiing for China, but she is of Chinese descent. And she just said being representation is so important. I can't remember who she skied for, but I remember hearing her saying that and thinking like, oh, I'm still seeking to see representation. I need to start being it. And that was a huge lesson for me.
That's great. So can we ask what the 2 movies are?
Yes. Happiest Season with Mackenzie Davis and Kristen Stewart. And Underneath the Christmas Tree. And unfortunately, I don't know the women's names who are in that, but it is lovely. And you will recognize other characters, like the woman who plays the mother, I think is in one of the Santa Claus movies. So you'll recognize her. And then there is a gay movie that we also watch. I believe it's called Jingle All the Way, which is 2 men, which is lovely as well.
Yeah, and these are romantic holiday comedies, so yeah, they're
bad quote good.
Bad/good, right, exactly. And it's wonderful because you don't have to do the work of inserting yourself. You're there, you're represented if you happen to be a lesbian or a queer woman.
Well, and I do believe with the Sacred Mirrors, going back to that as well. I mean, one of the things I tend to write when I'm applying for fellowships and grants and things is, I've been told that my writing isn't queer enough, whatever that means, but that I also have a desire to be somewhat mainstream and help other people learn to begin to find themselves in someone else's narrative. Because some people have never had to find themselves in somebody else's narrative. Most women have. Obviously, people of color, people of different sexual orientations, blah, blah, blah. But there are people who have never had to find themselves. So they don't know how. Like, they can just flip the channel and find something that looks like them.
Right.
But I think it's important.
Yeah. I mean, I think it helps with empathy and with just being able to see things from other vantage points, opens a world to all of us.
Absolutely. And I know I've said this before too, and I need to look up this woman's name, but she was the head of RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, who said that young men are taught that they speak for the universal and women are taught that they speak for women. And when I heard her say that, I felt like somebody blew up my mind. Because I was like, wow, that is totally true. And in storytelling in particular, right, it's always the hero's journey. It's always male-centric.
Yeah. So, Laura, we're wondering if you could tell us a little bit. We talk with a lot of novelists here. We've talked with some poets as well. What is your day-to-day life like as a playwright? Can you tell us, what's a typical day for Laura Thoma, the playwright, or a week, or whatever time frame?
Absolutely. It depends. But it changes depending on the season, I will say. But I do my best to have different days for different projects because I have multiple projects. And so I try to do submitting on one day because submitting takes you into a different part of your brain.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you explain what submitting is?
Yes. So submitting is finding opportunities to apply to. So whether it's for a fellowship or to a theater that's looking for plays, or sometimes you're doing cold submissions for theaters who aren't looking for plays, but you're like, hey, you might want to look at my play. The challenge with submitting is you have all the playwrights, right? I don't care about social media because I know how many playwrights there are and we're all going after the same opportunities. But the thing with some of the bigger submissions, this time of year, a lot of them are coming up. I'm currently submitting to Playwright Horizons, but they want you to do all sorts of different things. So I have to write a brief project summary. I have to have a bio. Some people want an artist statement. So you're constantly taking the tools that you have or have created and picking the pieces of them that you're going to use, plus then whatever you're proposing or submitting of your plays. So that's a day for me, because I'm also working this time of year of rewriting all those things. Like I'm redoing my bio because a year has gone by. What else have I done? What do I need to add? I need to redo my resume. So that tends to be a day in itself. I tend to break my day into 3 chunks. I have morning, and then I have afternoon, and then usually evening. I really like to write in the evening, but it's not always the best. I don't know. I think differently at night. So I enjoy that.
Oh. I understand that, because that day where you're submitting is business, right? So you have to be in a less creative space maybe, and doing, I would imagine, a lot of internet surfing and finding out contacts and who you need to be getting in touch with, and then what pieces of your work would fit for what they're looking for and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I feel like I've gotten a little bit better, because it's very easy to do busy work that you don't have to do. Part of it is also deciding what you're going to submit to. So the other day, I shared this in a playwright forum. I found a submission that wanted you to pay to submit, which some do, and they justify it by saying, oh, we have to pay the readers, which is, of course, the reader should be paid as well as the playwright who has written the play. So they wanted you to pay to submit, and then if they produced your work, you weren't going to get paid. They were going to do it royalty free. So you have to be able to go through and cut those out. And like when you first start, a lot of people will do anything because they're just trying to get their work out there, which I still am. But you get to that point where it's like, okay, they're just making money to do a little bit of a season. They'll do this in the summer. They'll use 10-minute plays. Lovely, but not worth my time. So I feel like I'm getting more choosier.
Right, refinement in your searches. So when you wake up on those other days, when it's days to be writing, how do you do it? Chris and I, on the last episode, we were talking about Envy, which was our 3rd quarter read-along. And the main character, she's an editor. And she's spending her time working very specifically, refining a manuscript with a writer. And one of our listeners was like, it didn't seem like she was ever at work, because she was supposed to be, leading this publishing house. I think that I could feel that way myself, because I'm someone who's gotten up out of bed a lot of years and have very specific tasks to accomplish. And when I wake up and I have a day that doesn't look like that, it can be a little confusing for me. Absolutely. So how do you face these days where you're looking at your computer or your pen and pad, whatever you use? How do you make a frame for yourself to get your work done?
Yeah. Well, when I'm on it, when I'm in a good space, I set myself up usually on Sundays for the week, so I know what I'm doing. My challenge has been the multiple projects I'm working on. So I have plays that are really in the beginning. I'm trying to add into that studying time. So there are people, structure, podcasts on structure. There's all sorts of people I want to read and look at. So I'm trying to fit that into my days as well, because I feel like that will help me. And as I think I said to you before we started, that self-motivation, I'm really good at it. But when all of your projects are that, it does take a toll. So it makes it a little bit more challenging. But to answer your question, I tend to be like, this is what's coming up. So like Miss Margaret's coming up. I'm also directing it. So I need to spend time. I'm avoiding it right now, honestly. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to do that. Let me do submissions. So submissions is kind of taken over right now, because I'm like, I can control this. I can rewrite until I get that statement really well done, which is exciting for me, because I do feel like I've had some amazing teachers who have supported me, and I've been reaching out and saying, please give me feedback. So I feel like that's been an exciting part, and I feel like I'm slowly getting to the next level. But I do my best to spread out all the projects that I want to be working on each week. And I have found that the ones that I really am excited about, that are really personal, I tend not to do them because I'm really scared of them. So that's where I have a playwright friend that I talk to every week. That's where I schedule with him. I'm like, okay, by next week, I'm going to have done this.
That's great.
I have accountability with him.
Accountability partner. That's amazing. Yeah, really good.
Yeah. So do you let your mood guide you, or are you really kind of strict with this play, this day? On Sundays, do you detail things that specifically?
Yes, to both of those, I would say, because I do set up what I'm going to do, but there's no point if I can't access what I'm trying to write about. I have to be willing to pivot and go, okay, that's not going to happen. I just can't. What else can I work on that'll move it forward? And one of the things I have is a huge whiteboard in my office, and I have pictures of every project I'm working on because the visual is better for me. And then I tend to list next to it. So that reminds me too, oh, right. Even though I don't have a producer for this, or I don't have, this isn't going anywhere, this is something I wanted to move forward. So don't forget about that one. And I'm getting into bullet journaling. I'm not convinced yet. I think it's cool. I love pen and paper, but I haven't harnessed it yet.
Yeah, bullet journaling is a real thing. You buy this journal and it has very specific ways that you're to set up how you handle your time and your projects.
Absolutely.
Correct? Yeah.
And Ryder, the guy who invented it, is amazing, and listening to him is amazing, but he's so fast and he thinks so fast. And he's not very visual. Everything's little small symbols, and I want flowers and colored markers. And so I found other people who have taken his system and opened it up a little bit. So I find that helpful, but that's the challenging part. I feel like when I'm on it, I really do have my schedule with those 3 morning, and that doesn't mean I'm working, but a 2-hour session here, a 2-hour session here, or whatever session there. So I scheduled, and that helps.
Yeah, I can see that. Or else the day goes, as we all know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Laura, when you sat down to write the play, did you find yourself watching every adaptation of Sense and Sensibility that's out there, or rereading the book several times?
No, I actually just jumped in because I have read every thing of Sense and Sensibility, and I've watched, I think, all the adaptations. The interesting thing was, after I wrote it, going back to see who is the woman, who is this person's aunt, those kind of things. There were some things like I think I got totally wrong. And then I had to decide how much of Sense and Sensibility does somebody need to know? Like, if they don't know it at all and they're coming to see Miss Margaret, what do they need to know? And then how do I get that backstory, that piece of the backstory, into the play without it being like, and now here's a little about Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And I think I said, like in Harry Potter, she who must not be named, we won't talk about her, but Chris Columbus, that whenever he needed to get something from the book that was not really in the movie, but we needed to know a piece of that. So if you hadn't read the books, how did he do that? He chose Hermione to be the character because she was such a know-it-all and she would have read a book about it. Mm-hmm. So she could be like, oh my gosh, I read this in a book. So I was thinking who in my play could be that person. And it's Mrs. Jennings, because she's such a gossip and she's such a busybody and she's always trying to get information or she's always trying to tell somebody something. So I was like, ooh, she's a great character to be able to be like, so blah, 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 blah. This is what you need to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to give you some backstory about Sense and Sensibility itself.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think like that's the beauty of these kind of plays is the people. I saw one written by Kate Hamill that was about Holmes and Watson, but it was turned. So it was 2 women were Holmes and Watson. And I went with my friend Katya, who really knows that world. And she had a heyday. There were so many things that I didn't get, but I still really enjoyed the play. Like the story was enough. But for the people who know the world, there's so much more.
Right.
And that's where I hope to have achieved in Miss Margaret as well. If you know Sense and Sensibility, you're going to get things. But if you don't, you're also going to enjoy it and enjoy the romp.
Very cool. And so the production is coming up in December, but have you workshopped it? Can you tell us a little bit about the development of it so far?
Yeah, it has never been on its feet. So this production will be the very first time, which is fascinating. I'm excited and extremely nervous about that. But we've worked with several actors. We've done Zoom readings. I don't think we've ever done a full in-person reading. So this will be the first. We did last year at Drama Works. It was a short play at that point. So the play has been expanded to full length.
Very cool.
And you've got it casted and you're ready to go?
We are cast. Unfortunately, we lost the one male in our midst. So we're in the process of recasting that.
Yeah. Okay. So you've talked about workshopping plays and everything, and with the production coming up in December, has Miss Margaret been workshopped? What has the process been?
It hasn't been officially workshopped, but we've had Zoom readings. And then when I was at the Outrage, the residency in upstate New York, we did excerpts of work we were working on, and I was working on Miss Margaret at the time. And so it was amazing. We had a public reading, and I think we did the first 3 scenes of it. And the cool thing up there is it was played with all different genders. So a male played Miss Margaret and different people in different roles. And it was just a hoot. We had an almost entirely queer audience who just ate it up. I think that moment of again, seeing a world that you love, never saw yourself represented, and then having a diversity of people read it, it was just lovely.
Very cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah. We were talking a little bit off mic at one point about jokes being universal or not, or related to specific worlds or specific communities. Is that something we'd want to talk about a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't know if it's about the jokes, but it's more about my goal is to not make the queerness the central conflict. Mm-hmm. So therefore, like in this play, Margaret Wears Pants, and one of the feedbacks I think I was saying was I got from somebody who was reading the play was like, oh, well, people are upset that she's wearing pants, but they're not upset that she's involved with a woman. And it was like, you're kind of missing the point. The whole point is it's subversive to have two women in an Austen world, obviously. So the pants are funny. It's funny that she has on pants. Like, the conflict is not the queerness, which is challenging because many people, they want you to make the queerness the conflict.
Yeah, and that's what so much creative work has been in the past about queerness. It's been about the gay bashing and the family rejection and the struggle to be accepted. So to have stories like the movies we mentioned earlier and plays like Miss Margaret where that's all accepted. So you don't have to worry about the characters in that way.
Right, you get to be in the frivolity of it.
Right.
And I am reminded of Ted Lasso and those writers who did such a beautiful job when, spoiler alert, if you haven't watched Ted Lasso, close your ears. When Colin comes out and somebody in the locker room says it's no big deal, and Ted says it is a big deal, and we do care, because somebody's like, we don't care. Trying to be supportive, but the point is we do care, you know, and that's important too, is that we do care. It is important that people understand that it is still a struggle and that we need good support. But to have representation where it's not about what we call in writing trauma porn, it's not about that. It's about the love story.
Right. Well, you know, on your website, in your current bio, you say that you're a trauma-informed writer. Can you talk about that line between being trauma-informed and trauma porn?
Yes. I think it was important at a time in history that I think we always need to see sometimes what the actual trauma is. But do we? I don't know. I don't know that we ever really need to see the trauma on stage. For me, being trauma-informed means I'm somebody who was diagnosed with CPTSD. And it means that I write about hope because I know the power of hope. I know the importance of having hope, and that when we don't have hope, things don't end well for us. So I think that's the difference. Unfortunately, I think many theaters, when they first started bringing in diverse work, no matter what community it was, they wanted to see the struggle more than the celebration. And I think that was a very important part of our journey. But I do question sometimes when I'm watching other people's work, is this what this generation wants to see, or do they want to see the evolution, you know, what happens past the struggle? The people who came before us, I mean, this is the intergenerational connectedness, right? The people who came before us have paid a heavy price for us to have the life we have. And that's part of queer joy. We need to start celebrating that in our community and in other communities, however they define that.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Thank you. Yeah. So all of this is your solitary work as a writer with accountability. Can you talk a little bit about when you're actually in the theater and collaborating? As we mentioned in the intro, you're co-founder of Shoreline Playwrights. Can you talk a little bit about the collaboration, and is that a different season as well as part of your creative work?
Yeah, I mean, collaboration, for me, it's best when it's going on all the time. Even when I don't have something, I just reached out to a director friend of mine. I was like, hey, you want to look at this as something that I did in my coaching life? You want to look at making a short film of this? He's like, I don't know how to do that. I was like, me neither. Let's just talk about it. Because I like talking with somebody, because I work so much by myself. But like Shoreline Playwrights, yeah, we work to develop our plays, which is amazing. So in February, I did a 3-day workshop of a play called Writer's Block. I brought in a young director who I just love, and she thinks of things in a completely different way than I do. So that was amazing. And these tremendous actors. And my favorite place to be is either, we call it in the room, to be in the room or in the theater with a director. I love getting to be the playwright and getting to like edit scripts, because when you have good actors playing with your text, you're like, that doesn't work. Say it this way. Try this. It's really easy to tighten things up.
And this is interesting to me because thinking about a novel, people write a novel, they have a draft, they may work with an editor, tweaking things as they go. But like with a play, you've written this play and then it goes into development where you're working with the actors. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, plays can get tweaked until opening night. But it depends. some playwrights don't really believe in development. Development has become a thing in the theater because it's cheaper than actually producing a play. So a lot of things go into workshops. Some people like them, some people don't. I love workshop because for me, I think probably because I was a performer, I know the power of the performer. I know the power of the actor. I know that they're going to do something that's going to unlock something for me. I just said this to a playwright friend of mine the other day. I was like, you gotta stop. Like he was writing, rewriting, writing. And I was like, until somebody speaks it, you do get a novel-ish in your head. That's not helpful because reading it on the page is not the same. It can sound great on the page, but that doesn't mean it's going to sound great when somebody says it. So you really have to have, at least for me, I have to have actors saying my words. And the minute they do, I'm like, oh my God. Like this one play, I was like, that's so funny. I didn't know it was funny. And they were like, you didn't know it was funny? I was like, well, I knew it's funny, but they made it funny, you know? And I was like, oh my gosh, which then unlocked the other pieces that I needed to create more tension and challenging things. And all of us as writers, no matter what form, you have strengths and weaknesses. And stakes are a real weakness for me. I love character. So when I get in the room with actors, I can see like, okay, you have to write. You have to find the conflict. You have to write the stakes, not just the character.
Yeah, and then you take it out and then you have the audience reaction, right? Which adds a whole other layer to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is nothing. Like when Magpie was done as a production, that was so crazy to me because you're in the dark, which is my favorite place to be, with strangers, believing, love it. But then with that play, like it would be like silent toward the end. I was like, are people bored? What's going on? And then the lights would come up and people were crying. And I was like, oh, this is so cool.
Yeah. So let's circle back to Miss Margaret's Barton Cottage Christmas Surprise. How did you decide what pieces of Jane Austen's world to include in this play? Because there's a lot of Jane Austen.
There is. Many other playwrights have also explored that world. It left a few choices, and Sense and Sensibility is one of my favorites. And I kind of looked at what character had Austen not explored very much, which makes it easier. When I wrote this play, I was like, oh, this is why people do these kind of novels and plays, because I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easy. You have this whole world that you know as someone who has read it. So you're playing in somebody else's world, though you're expanding it. I chose where Margaret was going to go and how it's all set up in Sense and Sensibility, right? She loves the atlas. She's up in the treehouse with the telescope. She loves to explore. So it's all set up that she would be a traveler, but it's not really talked about. She's only, I think, 11, I believe, when the book ends. So it just left this like, oh, here's a great place to go. So that's why I picked it.
Fun. Mm-hmm. So Laura, how can people get tickets to this play?
They can either go to my website, which is laurathomaplaywright.com. And on the very top, they can click for tickets there. Or they can go to DramaWorks Theater, spelled R-E, theater.org.
And we will put all these links in the show notes.
I can't wait for you to see it. I'm so excited.
All right. And again, the dates for Miss Margaret's Barton Cottage Christmas Surprise, December 13th through the 21st. Laura, thank you so much for coming and talking with us. We can't wait to see this play.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to The Book Cougars with Chris Wallach and Emily Fine. We'll be back again with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, come chat with us on social media, Goodreads, or email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support our podcast, please tell others about us, leave a review wherever you listen, and consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month is a big help. Learn more about that on our website, bookcougars.com, where you'll find the show notes for this and all of our past episodes.
Thanks, everybody.
This episode was edited by Pat Keogh Sound Design.